어어어어. 어어어어. 어어어. 어어어.
few months. It is precarious that uh, when the grasshoppers pass, they eat or sugarcane, corn, and rice completely. It is obvious that the disruption to the global food supply will happen. China has achieved growth as the second largest economy in the world and the second largest military power, uh, and also is making a big voice to the world widely. But we know that China is helpless in front of natural disasters, and this is our reality. It might seem it's okay, but we're not okay. Seems everything has ended, but the end is not near yet. And that's why I hope that the turning point to make a good change in the world should be absolutely needed soon. And God knows what the turning point is. The first question studying Elisha, the prophet who followed Elijah, was why God prepared an ordinary young Elisha when Elijah, Israel's greatest prophet, was in ministry. God, you gave the power to Elijah and the resources to Elijah, and you could use Elijah for a long time. But why did you um, use Elisha? The various views may be possible, but God used Elijah to have a turning point in his life. There are three turning points. The first turning point is you need to be held by God. And the second thing is you'll have a great future. And the third thing is you need to be trained. And and with these 3 points, three turning points, God sent Elijah to Elisha. Elijah, a great prophet, was sent to the next generation's prophet, Elisha. 450, the evils of King Ahab and his wife and the Israeli kingdom at the time has reached the peak. And Elijah was against Ahab and his wife. And by looking at this, we know that how Elijah was very brave. So when Elijah confronted Ahab and his wife, uh, he was uh, he was threatened by the power of the king. So at that time, 450 Baal prophets who worked for the evil queen were there. And if there is a king greater than the king, uh, God, there's. Let me skip to the next part. 450 Baal prophets who worked for the evil queen Isabel were killed, and this was a great turning point for the Israelites' faith to be recovered. And because of the prophets were killed, Isabel was infuriated, and Isabel wanted to immediately retaliate against Elijah. And because of that, Elijah was fearful. Because Elijah was just an ordinary man, just like us. The personalities may have been similar to us. Aren't you fearful that um, your fellow friend Elijah's next concern was being exhausted, and even he was exhausted. He prayed to God under the broom tree, where he had flowed whole day right at. And the Bible verse says that I have had enough, Lord. He said, "Take my life, and I am no better than my ancestors." Elijah wasn't weak like this. He was very brave of himself, and he was very obedient. But in this verse, we can see that how he was very tired and very exhausted. And when we describe the situation, we call this a burnout syndrome in the technical term. This means that a person is immersed in one thing becomes helpless due to extreme physical and emotional fatigue, slowly rejecting his work and rejecting his work. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. And we can see that how he was self-hating himself. We know that the body, mind, and emotion and soul are associated with fragile beings. When Elijah was immediately threatened with life by the supreme power, his emotions begin to begin to reach the climax. And for example, if somebody talks to person, a person replies with some anger, and that's how we can see how one's emotions has reached a peak. And Elijah would have felt the burnout because even though he killed the Baal prophets, he was being hunted down by the supreme power. And that's why his body and soul were exhausted gradually. The angel came to touch Elijah twice, and the soul and emotion gained strength. And the angel let him eat the food with the water, and he gained strength. An angel cannot just go to him if God does not allow. But why did the angel come twice to uh, Elijah? We can't explain it exactly, but the angels twice coming to Elijah show us two things. It takes a good while, good time for a person to recover. This is very similar to getting vaccinations. The next thing that God showed through angel coming twice was that we can get our exertion just through eating and resting. It wasn't just bread and water and resting um, gave him strength back. It was God's touch that allowed Elisha to be recovered. When when we approach God with our soul, mind, and body all focused to Him, there's new strength that comes from God. And if we have been living with the strength of food, now we experience God's power to be strengthened. And this is mentioned in Isaiah 2. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. The strength that frees us from burnout is God's power, and God's touch. God heals us, and God needs to touch this earth. God has to touch our country. We may become weary and say, we want to die. We are done here. And at those moments, who can say, who can talk to somebody, or who can happily spread God's words? But at those times, we find gracious moments. And when we run away, God is God, and God is still with us. And even at the rodent tree, Elijah was accompanied by God. And if you pray, God will uh, come to you. I want to establish this nation. And this is the ministry that you will lead. And that's why you need to be encouraged soon. And God's ministry was this. Through Elijah, God wanted to establish a new king by pouring oil on the king's head. And another part of his plan was that to establish the next generation's prophet. Saving the people and the nation starts from faithful life. God's ministry cannot be stopped even though we get threatened or become tired. And ministry is the thing that we need to um, really work with. The ministry is a duty that God has asked us to do faithfully, to faithfully take care of it until the last minute. When Elijah or when God called us to worship, if we deny that, we cannot be um, together with God. We certainly have responsibilities. The responsibilities given by God are very important. And hope that we know that. even during the hard time.
힘을 낼 수가 있거든요. 조금 더 그 뒤를 소홀히 여기지 않았으면 좋겠어요.
I hope that
하나님께 이렇게 얘기했습니다.
you do not underestimate the responsibilities that God
마지막까지
gave out to us
마지막까지 감당해 보겠습니다.
and say,
이런
I will take care of it until the last minute.
마음이
Even though you might not have to start
가져다
now, but this
너는
can approach you
생명의 위협을 받거나
later.
네가 생각해야 되는 것은 이 나라의 신앙.
Even if you're threatened of your life, and even if you're tired, you have to think of God's ministry until the last minute. And this was said to Elijah. And Elijah listened, and Elijah left the cave, Mount Horeb, to find Elisha.
된다고 말하시지 마십시오. 나와야 돼요. 미션을 위해서. 그리고
Don't say that we need more time to be recovered, but just leave to work.
사람이 바로 교회가 어려울 때
As a church, we want to establish the people who will be used by God.
우리가 포기해면 안 되는 그 미션은 뭐냐면
Even if during this hard time, even if during this pandemic, we cannot give up on establishing the next generation. And I hope that this ministry is part of us until the last minute. And if you want it, we will follow.
한편에 있는 엘리야 하나님은 다시 이렇게 회복시키셔가지고 엘리사에 해줬습니다. 엘리사에게
God has recovered Elijah, and Elijah was sent to Elisha because it was important turning point for Elisha.
그러면 우리가
And lastly, we can see that how Elisha had been trained.
엘리사가 과연 엘리야를 어떻게 대했는가 알 수가 있습니다.
When we
당시
look at the next part, we know that how Elisha treated Elijah. And
어덜트였던
Elisha was an ordinary young man in his late teens or early 20s who was plying his father's shepherd's field. It says that 12 yokes of oxen, but I'm not familiar with this word yoke. A yoke means to have two oxen as a pair, and this pair of oxen work together to plow the field. So when we say two yokes of oxen, we know that there are 4 oxen total. And 3 yokes, obviously, it will be 6 oxen.
한 번에 아버지 그 밭에 나와가지고 12결의의
And this guy, Elisha, had 12 yokes of oxen to plow the field. And this means that there were 24 oxen. We say that how could you not good with multiplication, but we're same as them. And by looking at the number of oxen out the field, we know that how Elisha was very affluent, or Elisha's household was very affluent.
하나님께 문제를 내야 됩니다. 집값이 아니에요. 유산이 아닙니다. 지금
But we know that
엘리야를
we cannot be we
유지의 아들이
cannot be envious of those positions.
엘리사가 엘리야를 따라갑니다. 이 따라간다는 것은
And secondly,
자기가
before following Elijah,
그 개인을 다 기법하고 그냥 이 선지자를 따라가는
Elisha gave up on every bit of his possessions and just followed Elijah.
재산이 얼마나 많은지 몰라요. 그런데 그가 소두 마리
We could have got said how Elisha's father was very rich. And before following Elijah, he fed the people with 2 oxen.
아버지 소인데
This incident shows that
무슨 얘기냐면 아버지
Elisha must be the son who had gained his father's big trust.
내 아들이 그럴 정도면 그럴 만한 이유가 있다는 거예요.
His father could have thought that
평소에
if
어떻게
my
아버지
son
일을 잘 감당했는지
is behaving this way,
평소에
he might have
살면요.
reasons
우리의
to
그
do that.
필요한 시간과 구별되지 않아 연결돼요. 아버지가 한 말 하지 않았습니다. 네가
And God,
지금
or
그걸 좀
Elisha's father, did not say anything when Elisha followed Elijah.
엘리야가 찾아와 겉옷을 벗어서 일하는 엘리사에게 덮어주었습니다. 던져주었습니다. 이거 무슨 얘기냐면
The
너는 내
great prophet Elijah came to Elisha's workplace and
엘리사
took off
너는 나의
his
후임이고
coat
나를
and threw it on him.
위해서 이스라엘의
This
선지자가
action meant you're my successor and you're the next prophet. If we were in that position, we have asked, what are some benefits to us? Is there promotion or is there insurance associated with it? However, Elisha did not ask such things, but just followed Elijah. It wasn't guaranteed that Elisha become a prophet on the very next day or um, pretty much soon, but Elisha lived as an intern to learn same work for 10 years. Now, who would like to live as an intern to learn the same work for 10 years? And if our father says the same way and we have to work for 10 years, we would have run away. Elisha left the house and followed Elijah because he recognized Elijah as the one sent by God. And this recognition was strengthened by inspiration that Elisha had in his heart. During the time of King Ahab and Queen Isabel, 100 prophets were hiding, but only Elisha did public ministry while others hid.
누가 예배하는 그 예배를 하나님이 응답하시는지 중계하라는 거죠.
And God used Elijah to rebuild the altar of God and worship God before the Israelites and idolatry, to be an example for the Israelites to know who is a real king of Israel and who is a real leader, who is a real God of Israel.
그렇다면 어떤 예배를 드려야 하는지
And that's why God used Elijah to show real worship and to recover the Israel back to God worshiping nation.
예수 믿는 사람들에게 근본적인 변화는요 여러 가지 있겠지만 먹고 뭐하고 이런 것뿐만 아니라
The most precious duty for the believers to have is to have a worship. God's servant can lead worship but should be a worshiper at all moments.
예배로 영성이 깊어지고 우리의 사람됨이 익어가기 때문에 그 예배
Through worships, we mature spiritually. Through worship, we connect to God. And worship cannot be replaced by anything else. That's why we need to keep our position. And that's why we have the best attitude when we're worshiping God. And worship cannot be replaced. Elisha from the rich household. And when he received the clothes from Elijah, Elisha knew that Elijah was God or man of prayer.
삶을 산 정상에 올라가 엘리야가 무엇했나요? 땅바닥에 엎드렸습니다.
Elisha had just climbed the top of Mountain Carmel
땅바닥에 엎드려
and
무엇하나요?
knelt while
기도받고
facing between his
무엇입니까?
knees and
하나님께
prayed relentlessly
기도했습니다.
7 times.
엘리야는 그의 사제 가운데에 기도의 사람 조직비에 기도하는 책이 많았는지 없었는지 몰라요.
We don't know that Elijah had books about prayer,
얘기하고 있지 않습니다. 그가 또한 나는 기도하는 사람이거든이라고 사람들에게 얘기하지
and
않았어요.
Bible doesn't say that Elijah boasted to the people that he was a man of prayer, but we know that Elijah was a man of prayer. And Jesus taught the disciples in the Lord's Prayer to pray like this.
기도하는 사람 기도의 사람이요.
The man who prays, the man of prayer, the time of prayer is our through God. When Elijah came to Elisha, he didn't say, I'm a true worshiper. He didn't say, I'm a true prayer man. And he didn't boast the miracles that were done through him. He did not boasted him of himself. Did not boast of himself. But Elisha still knew that Elijah was a man of God, and that's why Elisha followed Elijah. And we already have met these men or women of God. It could be your wife, it could be your husband, or it could be your children. Elijah began to dream of restoring faith. Usually, people begin a life as a Christian for their own interest, and then they meet an unexpected turning point. And pandemic of this time could be an unexpected turning point for us too. It could be a turning point for us to dedicate, and it could be time for us to dream that the family, church, and people return to God and they restore faith. When I was living in California, I visited a city called Riverside near Los Angeles. This city was famous for its hot climate. In front of the city council, there are three statues of famous men. There was Martin Luther King, and there was Gandhi from India. And in the middle, there was a statue of Chang'o An, and who's from Korea.
도산 안창호 선생의 동상이 맨 앞에는 마르틴 루터 킹, 그 다음에 도산 안창호 선생의 동상, 마지막에
There's Martin Luther King Jr. in the first, and Changwan in the middle, and Gandhi on the right. And it was very surprising to me to have this statue. And the guide and the guide explained how the statue began to be raised.
청년 안창호가
And I was heartbroken to hear the guide's explanation
어떻게 하면 나라를
why the statue was erected on American soil.
청년이 그 생각했다고요. 어떻게 하면 우리나라를
A
일본으로
young
인도할 수 있을까
adult,
고민했대요.
Chang
어떤 사람은
An,
우리가 총칼로
was
훈련해서
thinking
싸워야
about how to
한다는
save his country taken away by Japan.
미국과 같은 유럽에 있는
A young
나라들과
adult.
외교를 맺어가지고 도움을 받아야 됩니다.
Some argue to fight Japan with the weapons.
우리의 이
Some argue to
우리가
be
해야
helped
되는데
by other countries by
그러려면 우리에게
diplomacy.
뭐가 필요해요? 힘이 필요하다. 그 힘은 어디에서
But
나오냐면
Chang An was convicted that his
사람으로부터.
country
야, 하고
should grow its
싶잖아요.
strength.
총칼도 하기요, 미국도
And
하기요.
this strength
우리가
does
우리의
not
사람이
come
죽어서 이
from the
땅을
weapons or
구해야
diplomacy,
크리스천.
but it comes from people,
예수님이 이 땅에
the people
오셔서
of faith.
3년간 평생의
And this
가운데
is
가장
because
큰
he
일을
was a
한
Christian.
사람이 예수 제자 삼는 거예요. 사람 키우는 거예요.
And this is similar to Jesus' ministry,
내가
how
그걸
Jesus
보고
has raised disciples as
세계에서
or
떠오르는
disciples
군대들이 있었는데 그
as the
나라가
men of faith. And that's why he chose America to see and learn,
이 나라가 어떻게 힘을 키웠는지
to see and learn how America has grown its power.
오렌지 농장이 많은 곳이.
So the place that he visited had numerous number of orange farms.
자기가 사는 동네 오렌지 농장 주인에게 가서 사장을
He visited an orange farm in the riverside and begged to owner to hire him. He requested the owner to see how orange grows and how orange could be
수년이 지나도 변치
could be
않는
planted.
안창호 선생의 자세와
And the owner was
그의
impressed by his
인내가
true and
무엇보다
sincere
그의 신앙으로
attitude.
인해서 농장 주인과 그를 아는 미국인들이 감탄을 했답니다.
That hired him without any conditions. And after many
조그만한
years,
나라에 미스터 아니 진짜
these
대단하다.
Americans were impressed
나중에 안창호
by
선생이
his diligence.
특별히 세우고
diligenceness.
사람들을 키웠습니다. 그 사실을 쉽게 듣게 된 그 미국인들이
And when he went back to Korea.
이웃 땅 가운데
Americans established some schools and became.
리버사이드 시티홀 앞에
When he went back to his Korea,
100년 전 나라가 힘을 얻기 위해
established some schools and
것을
became the
자기의
spiritual leader
일로
of
알고
Korea.
살았던
And the Americans who had known him were very proud of it and gathered money to build that statue in the city.
예수님의 제자가 되어야 됩니다. 나를 위해서가 아니에요. 얼마나 더잘 먹고 잘 살고 많은 것을 자녀들에게 물려주기 위하여.
And Changwon, a true patriot for his country more than 100 years ago, had come to America to see and learn for his country's recovery, not for himself. Changwon was interested in the next generation that will lead Korea in the future. Our society's older generation is often worried about the younger generation because they only think and take care of only themselves. And I think that old generation is a reason why the new generation has become that way. Because the faith that they have is selfish faith. A selfish faith is a faith that has to mature.
생수의 강물 예수 그리스도가 나를 넘어서 플로잉 아웃되어 가지고 가정과 우리 교회와 이곳에 있는 커뮤니티 교회와 우리 민족까지 열방 가운데 나의 신앙이 흘러가는 것을 내 소원으로 삼는 그 사람.
A person who makes his faith to flow from him or herself and to reach the people, to build a nation of faith is needed.
그냥 아버지 재산 물려받아서 농사 지으면 모처럼 잘 사는 인생이 그의 인생이
young Elisha did not have
엘리야를 만나
things to worry when he was young because he was very rich
나라가 민족의 신앙을
and he wasn't satisfied with that, but he imagined imagined Israel to be recovered. And
여러분들의
he
위대한
wanted
인생을
wanted Israel to be become a nation of God. And that moment became the turning point that he was held in the hands of God and could live the great future life. And as a conclusion, when Abraham left his father's house and took his son
귀한 아들을 데리고
Isaac to Mountain Moriah,
향하라고 했을 때 소리 안 하고 아들 데리고 떠났어요. 포기한 게 뭐냐면 아들이었어요.
the thing that he gave up was his son.
그리고 엘리사가 엘리야를 떠나
And when Elisha followed Elijah to become his
21절 말씀 다시 교환합니다.
attendant,
시작. 엘리사가 집으로 돌아가 소 두 마리를 잡고 소가 맺은 멍에로
as Elisha left them and went back,
요리를 만들어 사람들에게 주었습니다.
he took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing and to cook the meat and gave it to people, and they ate.
엘리야를 따라가
Then he set out to follow Elisha and became his attendant.
10년간 똑같이 날마다
Elisha,
해야 될
as attendant for next 10 years, he had the same task.
그냥 무작정 어떻게 되겠지? 사랑하는 여러분, 계산해 보십시오. 여러분들의 주파를 눌러 보십시오. 계산기를 따져 보십시오. 엘리사가 누구를 만났어요? 예배 사람,
Who did
교회
Elisha
사람,
meet and
나와
come home?
민족을 꿈꾸던 그 사람을 만났을 때에 그도 나와
Was a
민족을
person,
꿈꾸고 나도 기도하고 싶고 나도 예배하고
person who
싶다.
dreamed of God.
그러니까 과거에 안락한 삶과 보장된 삶을 놓고
And because Elisha wanted to worship God and be like them, be like Elisha, that's why he left his house.
자유를 잃는다고 여기는 분들도 계신 것 같아요. 하나님을 제대로
Some people think that serving God makes them lose something and
영원한
maybe freedom.
수입이
But there should be amazing rears of faith.
신앙생활을 얻게 될 보장에 대해서 하나님이 말씀하셨어요. 내가 이토록
What is
나를
God's
품고
promise to
너희
deliver in
인생을
words of
쓸모없는
faith?
인생이 아니요 소금과 같이 빛처럼
It gives
나아가는
eternal
삶을
life to his
살 것이라고
followers and let
말씀하셨는데
them be
결국
light and
우리는
salt in the world.
가시적으로 보이는
And because that,
세계적인 석학 밑에서 제자가 되는 거예요.
however, we're not interested because we cannot see such things. Smart young men compete and suffer to become a world-class scholar and try to build up their career and reputation. But we know that it's eternal reputation that we become disciples of Jesus and the honor that God acknowledges, and He promises that He will never let us alone forever. God is with us. And that's why we have very the greatest reward for faith, and now very powerful epidemic world is God who is with us. He's with our family and church, and I hope that this leads to the turning points for us to change. He is with us in our workplaces and our children's schools. He is with us right now, and that's why we worship Him.
나는 믿음으로 살아가는 믿네. 나는 믿네. 주의 능력으로 내 스스로 나에게 주신 나의 주의 능력으로 내 나가리라. 주와 함께서 승리하리라. 나의 믿음으로 살아가리. 시간 가슴에 손을 놓고요. 여러분들의 배우자의 손을 잡고요. 우리 이렇게 기도했으면 좋겠습니다. 천국 가서 받는 그 리워드, 이터널 라이프가 우리 개인의 전부가 아니에요. 이 코로나 시대 가운데 하나님이 주시는 놀라운 가장 큰 상급은 임마누엘이에요. 하나님이 우리와 함께 하시는 거예요. 여러분 직장과 가정과 우리 자녀들의 학교 가운데 연구소와 이 나라와 민족 세계 열방 가운데 선교사들의 부르심 가운데 하나님께서 함께 계십니다. 여러분 믿으십니까? 하나님 임마누엘을 믿는 신자로 담대함을 얻고 살아가게 하여 주시옵소서. 우리가 영원히 이길 것이며 주님을 더 신뢰한 예수의 제자들 가정되게 하여 주시옵소서. 우리 통성으로 기도하기 원합니다. 하나님 감사합니다. 우리의 심령 가운데에 흘림이 있습니다. 연약함이 있습니다. 여기 가운데 어떤 나라에 하나님 다시의 모습을 주셔서 예수 제자되어 주님이 영광이 하나님 주시는 영원한 프로미스를 우리가 살아가게 하시네. 오늘 나와주게 하시고 말씀 가운데 함께 하시며 오늘도 우리의 심령을 나와서 만져주시고 영원의 육신의 양식으로 공급하여 주시고 안전으로 아버지의 살아가게 하시는 주님을 찬양합니다. 우리가 좋습니다. 함께 하시는 주님을 신뢰합니다. 주님의 선하심을 인도하시며 우리가 깨닫는 분을 요구하는 이분까지도 열어주실 것을 믿습니다. 우리 자녀들의 선대의 때까지도 바라보는 영원의 완전되게 하여 주시옵소서. 우리가 정말 믿어야 됩니다. 믿음으로 살기 위해서는 믿어야 합니다. 나는 믿네. 주의 능력으로 내 삶 새롭게 하소서. 나는 믿네. 이 속에서도 담대함을 잃지 않게 하소서. 나는 믿네. 나는 믿네. 주의 능력으로 내 삶 새롭게 하리. 나는 믿네. 주의 능력으로 내 살아가리라. 주와 함께서 승리하리라. 나의 믿음으로 나 살아가리. 이제는 우리 주 예수 그리스도의 은혜와 하나님 아버지의 말로 다 할 수 없는 사랑하심, 지쳐 있어서 우리의 심령을 풀고 떠날 수 없어서 이 시간 너무 말씀으로 쓰다듬어 주시는 성령님의 감화감동 교통 역사 치료 회복하심이 주님 예수의 제자로 살고 싶습니다. 나의 가정과 나라와 민족을 하나님 앞에 온전히 돌아가는 부흥의 날을 살고 싶습니다. 하나님, 나는 어리고 나는 깨어져 있사오니 주님께서 성장시켜 주시고 다시 한번 예배 가운데 우리 심령과 가정 속에 회복을 허락하사 하나님께서 허락하신 믿고 맡기신 일을 감당케 하여 주옵소서. 내가 바로 그 사람입니다. 우리 집이 바로 그런 가정 되게 하여 주옵소서. 기도하고 간구하고 결단한 손들 사랑하는 주의 백성들과 가정과 기업과 자녀와 학교 위에 이 나라 위에 영원토록 함께 하시기를 예수님 이름으로 축원하옵나이다. 아멘.